Hello, welcome to the fifth event of our Virtual Thought Leadership Series. I'm Becky Hyde, Senior Executive of the Overseas and Corporate Business at Medibank. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we're all standing on today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Here in Melbourne, I stand on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I'd also like to extend our respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. I'm excited to have you all join us online for the fifth event of our Virtual Thought Leadership Series to help you and your teams and organisations to work better and ultimately live better. Today, we're joined by a very special guest for an important conversation about inclusive workplaces. Here in Australia, we have one of the most diverse populations in the world. Be it culture, gender, age, sexual orientation, religion, or otherwise, our population is vibrant and diverse. According to the most recent census of our population of approximately 25 million, about 19% of overseas-born Australians were born in non-English speaking countries. 3% of Australians identifying as Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islanders or both, 65,000 people speak an Indigenous language, nearly 20% of the population having a disability, and 10% of our population with carer responsibilities. With this in mind, how do we as businesses and a community remove barriers, provide equal opportunities for all, ensure everyone feels safe to be themselves and harness the value of our differences? What are the impacts of diversity and inclusion in the workplace to individuals, health and wellbeing and the broader community? Here at Medibank, we're committed to removing barriers that exist for our people, our customers and our community to access Medibank products and services. We're committed to creating an inclusive culture, one that acknowledges and embraces differences in all its forms and leverages the benefits diversity and inclusion bring to our people, our shareholders, our customers and our community. I'm very excited to introduce Adam Goodes, who joins us here today from New South Wales. I'll keep the introduction brief, as I'm sure many of you know Adam quite well, but for those of you who don't, Adam holds an elite place in Australian Football League's history as a dual Brownlow medalist and Sydney Swans premiership player. But his career transcends the football field. In 2014, Adam was named Australian of the Year for his community work and advocacy in the fight against racism, empowering the next generation of Indigenous Australians. In 2009, Adam co-founded the Olachlan Foundation with teammate Michael Olachlan to empower Indigenous Australian youth through education. In 2014, he joined the board of Supply Nation, a government-funded body aimed at growing the Indigenous business sector through the promotion of supply diversity in Australia. Adam is now the CEO and Director of Indigenous Defence and Infrastructure Consortium, IDIC, established because of Indigenous-owned and controlled businesses seeking to participate in the delivery of long-term nation-building projects. Adam, thanks so much for joining us here today.
Thanks, Becky. Pleasure.
Let's start with your work at IDIC, an organisation here at Medibank we're incredibly proud to partner with. For those in the audience not familiar with IDIC, could you tell us a bit about how it came to be and the journey the organisation has been on?
Yeah, of course. I think, I retired from football in 2015, so 5 years ago now, and during that last couple of years of my career, I was sitting on the board of Supply Nation, where I met fellow directors of IDIC. And what we were seeing was this incredible entrepreneurism of Indigenous people out in the community, starting their own businesses, starting joint ventures, really building their capability, but just having a difficulty at actually winning contracts and having that engagement at the highest level in organisations. And when I retired from football, George Mifsud, a director and worker in the business, and Michael McLeod, our Indigenous chair, and Doug Russell, they came to me with an idea that we really wanted to target defence. Defence in 2015 released the white paper saying they're going to spend $200 billion of our taxpayers' money on defence programs. And we thought that would be a great opportunity to help Indigenous businesses engage that big pool of money. So in 2016, in March, we decided to start the business, and in that first year, we spent the whole year in changing government policy to have Indigenous engagement written into all Department of Defence contracts, which we're able to do after about 12 months. And since that time, in the last probably 4 years, we've been able to build our relationships with big contractors like Medibank, sign agreements, CEOs. And for me, in those agreements, what we're signing and agreeing to is, from an IDIC point of view, to help you with your RAP KPIs, help you with your Indigenous engagement, how we can help with, educating your workforce and stakeholders around Indigenous engagement, value for money, and even employment outcomes for Indigenous people. So we've got about 11 strategic clients where I've signed agreements as CEO of IDIC and the CEO of companies like Medibank Private, BAE, Boeing, and Naval Group, who own the submarine contract in South Australia, Datacom, Fujitsu, companies like this who have strong connections and relationships with government, and government being their clients for some of the work that they're doing, especially in defence, but even in the infrastructure and even in the technology space like a Datacom and Fujitsu. So we know that, Medibank has an incredible relationship with one of our other clients in Datacom, and we're working with both of you to figure out how we can get more Indigenous businesses that have the capability in that technology space to provide more services, not only for Datacom but also to Medibank Private. So we see our role as looking after, we've got 90 plus Indigenous businesses now part of our consortium, and my role is to help them win contracts, to help build their capability to become defence ready, to be able to work with some of the biggest clients out there that they just haven't traditionally been able to get their foot in the door.
Fantastic. Thanks, Adam. How has the work impacted small to medium Indigenous businesses?
Yeah, this work has really helped. Like I said, Supply Nation are a supporter of ours, and we're still a massive supporter of Supply Nation. We look at Supply Nation as an incredible database of Indigenous businesses, but also having a membership base of its members who are the clients like Medibank and other big businesses. And if you like to think of that database as a dating app where Medibank will have an opportunity, they'll send that out to the Indigenous businesses will respond, and then those two will go on a date, let's call it, and see if they can work out if they can do business together. Now, we think that's a great way, and it's a great way that Supply Nations is set up to do that. But we saw a great opportunity to work on top of that, to already be working with the Indigenous businesses, already be working with the clients around what are the opportunities, how can we grow the capability of Indigenous businesses as part of our consortium before the opportunity actually comes available. So we see our role as not only managing the client and the relationship and the invoicing, but also at that grassroots level in building that capability, helping them with their tender responses. And it really is about giving them every opportunity to put their best foot forward to win those opportunities.
That's great, Adam. And I know that we've been working very closely with you as part of our Reconciliation Action Plan and Supply Nation. And it's been such an incredible benefit to Medibank and also delivering on our RAP. So thanks for your input in that. And in regards to the social impact on the Indigenous community and the growth of IDIC, how has that impacted the community?
Yeah, look, I think, the government gets a hard run, by everyone, I think, in community. But one thing that I'm really proud of and to be part of is the success of the Indigenous procurement policy and the government, in a way, forcing government agencies to procure with Indigenous businesses. Now that policy started in 2015, and in that first year, government agencies spent $268 million with Indigenous businesses on the back of good policy, on the back of 0.5% of all contracts had to go to Indigenous businesses. Now, if we go back a year and we talk about the same amount of government agencies where there was no policy, those government agencies only spent $6 million with Indigenous businesses. So we've seen on the back of good policy making and in a way, forcing those government agencies to work with Indigenous businesses, that we're able to generate some money that's going to now be spent with Indigenous businesses. So in that time period now, we've seen that percentage rate go above 3% of all contracts across government agencies at the federal level to go to Indigenous businesses. Now it's having a massive impact on the Indigenous business sector. We've seen the growth of Indigenous businesses grow exponentially in the last couple of years. Even just in the last 12 months, there's been over 300 new Indigenous businesses formed, which is great. And there's new partnerships being formed every year, which is really great in helping build that wealth for Indigenous people. But on the back of that, what we're seeing, especially if we talk about IDIC, of our 90 Indigenous businesses that are part of our consortium, over 60% of their employees are Indigenous people. So I know the more contracts I can get for my Indigenous businesses, the more Indigenous people are going to benefit through that, through having a job and employment and sustainable employment through those organisations. One thing else I'd like to add is that Supply Nation did a study a couple of years ago, and for every dollar spent with an Indigenous business, gave $4.41 value back to that community. Now that goes to show the sharing community that Indigenous people have, but how important that dollar actually is when we talk about the payback that it gives to Indigenous communities.
That payback's really impressive. And if we're looking at from the other side of the fence and from the client side, what benefits have you seen to organisations in partnering with Indigenous businesses?
The biggest thing for me is, a lot of Indigenous businesses are SMEs. So you're no longer a client of 100 to the big, corporate organisation you might be contracting with. You start contracting with an Indigenous business, now you become their number one or top 5 client for them. So the relationship that you have with them is very important, not only to them, but the relationship and the work that they do for you is at that highest level because you're such an important client of theirs to have. So for me, it's not only the relationship that is formed, but it's the work that you can do together. This is business as usual for you guys to contract with whoever you want, but when contracting with an Indigenous business, it has an incredible payback, not only to the community, but the business owners. And we're finally starting to see this middle class of Indigenous people starting to form across the nation, which is the first time it's ever happened.
That is great news. Shifting a little bit, I'd like to speak about cultural safety and the impact of diversity and inclusion more broadly, and how organisations across Australia can ensure steps are in place to increase participation of Indigenous people in the workplace. From your lived experience and experience in working with a large variety of organisations, what can businesses and individuals within businesses be doing to promote a diverse and inclusive workspace?
Yeah, I think we all want to see across every part of our community, true representation of who we are as a nation, and I constantly look at the media outlets and I constantly see people on TV that don't really represent who we are as a nation. For me, that diversity needs to come from leadership. Once we have it at the boardroom tables, once we have it as CEOs of our companies, then we can start to see the diversity filter down. So when we talk about Indigenous, then a reconciliation action plan is really important. But I always say this to our strategic clients, is that if we only focus on the employment part of engagement with Indigenous people in our organisations, we're really going to miss the opportunity through procurement and the value that you can create for those Indigenous businesses. And we look at the reconciliation action plans that are out there right now, and there's close to 1,000 of those across the nation, and there's another backlog of a couple of hundred. Now, if everyone puts 3% employment figures into their reconciliation action plan as a benchmark, then we're actually going to run out of Indigenous people in Australia to actually fulfil those roles. So we need to look at different ways how we can include that diversity and inclusion into our workforce. And for me, that's easy. We can easily do that through procurement. We can track the employment numbers of Indigenous people within those Indigenous companies that we procure through, and we can create that in a way second and third tiering of Indigenous engagement, that it doesn't have to be directly as an employment to Medibank or other clients, but it can actually be through the Indigenous businesses you're working with.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because I know at Medibank, increasing our Indigenous workforce, we're working a lot on that, but it takes a lot of effort. So what would be your tips to organisations that have dialed in today about creating a safe and secure place for Indigenous and Torres Strait Islander people within the workforce?
Yeah, it takes a very strong Indigenous person to come into an environment where they don't see Indigenous leadership, they don't see a reconciliation action plan, they don't see a pathway for them to be supported and improve, but to just stick at it. Now, it takes a very strong person. I think it takes a strong person in any background to come into an environment that they don't feel supported in. So if we can imagine that, we've all started new jobs and gone into environments that are scary. I was 17 when I walked into the Swans locker room, and there's Paul Kelly, Paul Roos, Tony Lockett. My jaw was hitting the ground. But what I did have was Michael Olachlan, Troy Cook, Robbie Armate, these other Indigenous players in the team. It just made it so much easier for me to just go about my business and know I had their back and they had mine. And for me, it's about creating a culturally safe environment. And what does that mean? It means the leaders in the organisation understanding, the history around cultural awareness and the importance of cultural awareness to our workforce. At the very bare minimum, that the leaders need to understand that and to have that empathy. And then as a staff and a colleague, just when we find out that someone's Indigenous, we don't then fall into the stereotypes that we see in the media that we might have learned about growing up about Indigenous people. Let's go ask some questions, have a conversation, get to know those people in our workforce, and share the stories that have brought our journeys to cross. Because a lot of Australians, we all come from different parts of the world to be here today, and a lot of those stories are quite similar. So, breaking down those barriers that we might already have in our minds through the media and through what we might have learned in our own family groups can be really helpful for helping us all, work harmoniously in different environments.
So just picking up on that football conversation, that peer-to-peer network you had at the Swans, was that one of the most important things in making you feel safe within that space? And were there any other strategies that the club enabled to make you feel like you're in a safe place?
Yeah, look, I think what made me feel safe in that environment was that I was treated exactly the same as all the other first and second year players at the club, where the older players didn't talk to you, you had to earn their respect. So I wasn't treated different because of, my background. I was treated different because of how many years I've been at the football club and how hard I trained and how much I listened to their feedback. So for me, that environment, I learned very quickly that I needed to prove my worth. I needed to show that I wanted to be there. And I had to work extremely hard to earn the respect of those older players. Now, it's a lot different in, the young players coming into our football clubs these days, that we have to take them under our wing. We have to give them all the information. We have to hold their hand. We have to give them cuddles. That is a completely different way of welcoming young people into that environment than what I was used to growing up. And it's worked completely well. Those young kids feel supported, they feel safe in that environment, and they start to improve and they start to show their worth a lot quicker than, the way that the old system works. So there definitely is merit in, providing people with a safe environment and a place where they feel respected and a place where they feel like they belong. Because once we belong somewhere and we feel that we fit and belong, you're going to get the best out of them.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that goes for everyone, doesn't it, really? Once you have that sense of belonging, everything else follows.
Very true.
Thinking about when you've seen workplaces do inclusion well, what are some of the strategies you've seen them employ and what are the tangible benefits of that?
Yeah, so definitely been to a lot of RAP launches in my life, and I've seen a lot of successful reconciliation action plans. And the plans that work extremely well for me are, people like SBS. And as you can think, SBS is an incredible network. It's all about diversity and inclusion, and you can really see that speak through its document, the reconciliation action plan. Their pathways into leadership positions, having specific leadership roles for Indigenous people within the organisation and pathways for them to achieve that, just showcase the importance of having diversity in those leadership roles. The diversity, unfortunately, isn't matched at the board level. People may remember a photo just going around quite recently of the SBS board that went viral. And it was very, what we like to say, white male, pale and stale. So for me, it's great that you can have that diversity underneath it, but you need it from the top. And, for people like myself and other leaders out there with diverse backgrounds, it's upon us to take on those leadership roles and to, break down those barriers, to get to those board seats, to have a voice at that table, so that we can create more change and hopefully quicker change going forward.
Thanks, Adam. Thinking about the younger generation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, how can we provide more opportunities for them and support and set them up for success?
Yeah, there's no point us, I think, if we're sitting here going, oh, we need Indigenous engineers, we've got all these opportunities. Well, we can't just click our fingers and hope that they're going to appear. We've got to start back at the schooling years and start pathways and education programs to get them excited about STEM subjects and how they could be engineers. So for me, it's about investing in the future. I have to admit, there's no better time than right now, today, to be an Indigenous person. The responsibility is on myself and other people in our community to make sure that we give those kids the best opportunity to be educated so that they can take up these opportunities that are out there, in the markets across so many different sectors. How can people who are listening today make a real difference for, the future generations? For me, it's understanding, what your grad program, internship program is like. Are you guys connected to career trackers who do paid internships for Indigenous university students? And that program is absolutely incredible across all the different hats that I wear. Career trackers is very much the one common denominator. If you're a career trackers student going to university, you're finishing university at a success rate of 94%, versus an Indigenous person who isn't a career trackers participant. They're graduating uni at about 46%. And if you're a career tracker alumni, so you finish your uni degree, you're actually finding work into a career 98% of the time after you finish your degree. So they're incredible numbers in success for a program which is true to my heart. And that internship program is something that anyone who's listening today, you're interested about it, we'd love to send you more information about it, because it really is a really successful program that helps Indigenous students get into corporate Australia offices around the nation.
Yeah, no, I have to reinforce that because we're very active with the career trackers at Medibank, and we've actually got 3 interns coming in during their summer break, which is incredibly admirable that they're taking, downtime to go into, virtually to go into an office each day. So very impressive, and it's been great having them as part of our workforce over that summer period. So we get a lot out of it as an organisation. And just on that, could you tell us a bit about the foundation that you set up with Michael Olachlan and what it does for Indigenous people?
Yeah, so we started the foundation the year that Michael retired in 2009. Michael and I are both from South Australia. Our grandmothers are sisters, and we're, having been in Sydney so long and been so well supported by the Sydney Indigenous community, if we ever left, we wanted to have a payback to say thank you to those people here. And so 4 years ago in our foundation, we started the scholarship program, and we wanted to do something that's going to make the biggest difference for Indigenous people. And for me, the biggest difference is all through education. There's no doubt that education is the way forward. And to be able to provide these scholarships to go to the best schools that they want to, whether it be an independent or public school here in Sydney or just around the corner from where they're living. Our point of difference is exactly that they're day students, they go back to their families at the end of the day. We've got a 60% focus on young Indigenous girls. We see a lot of our girls miss out on opportunities when it comes to these sorts of scholarships. So we wanted to have that 60% focus, and because Michael and I are both raised by our mothers and grandparents. So that was a real key for us. And, we started 4 years ago with 17 kids just in independent schools, and we're up to 550 kids this year across independent public schools, and now New South Wales and South Australia from where we are both from. And I have to point out that these scholarships are academic scholarships. These are all about helping these kids on their educational journey to university, to TAFE, a vet course. It's all about further learning and how we can support them to do that. So it's been a really tough year for our kids, but we've been able to give them the tools that they need to stay online, to stay up to speed with their education. And, of the 28 kids that have graduated year 12, 27 are at university as we speak today. The one that's not is at TAFE doing social work, and we're really proud of our kids coming through. They're the real stars in the whole story, and the future leaders.
That is incredibly impressive growth of that scholarship program. Congratulations. You spoke about it being a tough year, as it has been for everyone, of course, but what has been particularly tough for the kids, and what have the strategies been that you've used to help them through this period?
Yeah, the biggest struggle is feeling disconnected. So not being in the school room, having to share laptops at home, not having Wi-Fi at home. So this year we developed a IT scholarship for year 10s, 11 and 12 students across the state. And those scholarships are for kids to send in applications for a laptop and a Wi-Fi dongle. And to be able to provide 250 of those this year has really helped those kids in the most important years of their schooling, to stay up to speed and to stay connected. A lot of our students who are out there who didn't have the tools just didn't know where to go. And to be able to provide that service is something that we're really proud to being able to do. But for kids to put their hands up and say, this is something that we need and want to stay up to speed. But that doesn't touch all the kids out there. There's a lot of kids who are already behind that, working from home just didn't suit them. And it just didn't suit the family environment. So as we talk about the success of our program, there's still a lot of kids out there that, are falling through the cracks and they're slipping further and further behind. And, we look to in the future to be able to pick some of those kids up and help them back on their educational journey.
That's fantastic. Just broadly speaking, Adam, how far do you think Australia's come with inclusion? particularly in the workplace, and how much further have we got to go?
It's a really good question, because I was having a discussion with some, I call them elders, the other day, and, you know, we're banging our heads against the wall saying, man, nothing's changed. And they just sort of clicked their fingers and they said, do you know what's changed in my lifetime? And we're like, what's that? She goes, you know, I don't live on a mission anymore. I've been able to vote since 1967. I can see my grandchildren go to school and get an education, which is something that they weren't allowed to do. And I'm now seeing Indigenous people not just be successful on a sporting field or at an arts centre. You know, we're now business people, we're doctors, we're lawyers, we're accountants, we're business owners. And it just really made me sit back and think, wow, a lot has changed, and it is changing every single day. And the biggest thing for me is that the more educated our people get, the more opportunities that they have. And that really excites me, because the biggest population of Indigenous people in one area is just out here in Western Sydney here. And there's a great opportunity for me and the foundation and the work that we do. There's also a great opportunity for those companies that have offices out here in the western suburbs of Sydney, to start to create pathways for a lot of these Indigenous people and families, because as soon as you have one family member go to school, educated, get a job, they're now a role model within that family. They're now seeing sometimes, like a lot of families, that they're the first person in their family to get a paid job that isn't welfare. So we're creating these new batches of role models, and it's something that, you know, we all can be really proud of, these opportunities that we're providing. And what we've also seen in the last 10 plus years is the development of reconciliation action plans, the corporate responsibility of big companies saying that we diversity and inclusion is important, and actually going about that and doing something about it.
And you've spoken about leadership and top-down, and how it's important for the leaders in the business to be on that journey. And you've spoken about policy and government, and how it's been a really important shift to get things included in policy. How about the ground up within organisations? So for all of us employees who are within organisations at all different levels, what can we be doing in our everyday behaviours to drive inclusiveness and belonging?
I think for me, it's about understanding the people you work with. You know, one thing, unfortunately, that COVID has done is it really has, you know, put four walls around us all, and, you know, we just live in our own sort of little silos. And I'm a people person. I love to hear other people's journeys. If people I bump into, I always figure there's a reason that we're bumping into each other, and I like to learn from their stories and have those sorts of conversations. And for me, that inclusiveness starts by your own attitude and your own questions of others, and your own ability to share your journey and share your stories, because, you know, I'm a sharer, and when I share, it actually encourages other people to share, and it creates a bit of a safe environment for people to do that. So as a workplace, you know, how can we keep making this environment more inclusive? It does come down to leaders. It does come down to our own interpretations of what the culture is at Medibank, but also let's understand, you know, what are some of the biggest issues that are facing Indigenous people in our community. You know, some people can say, I don't have an Indigenous person in my team. I don't have an Indigenous business person in our organisation. Well, how can we be, you know, progressive and help Indigenous people? And one thing that we can help is, you know, by understanding what are the movements. You know, Black Lives Matter was a big movement this year, and a lot of people started to understand the relationship that Indigenous people have with their own law enforcement here in Australia, if we talk about the deaths in custody. But something else that's, you know, something really positive that we can focus on as a movement is the Uluru Statement of the Heart. Understanding what this statement is and how this is a gift from Indigenous people to Australia, asking you to walk side by side with us to help change our constitution, to have a makarrata of truth-telling, and to have Indigenous people not only written into the constitution, but giving us a voice and giving the governments an opportunity to have expert advice from Indigenous people when we talk about laws and policies going forward.
Yeah, so you're really talking about cultural awareness there, aren't you?
Yeah, it is cultural awareness, but even once you finish those cultural awareness courses, it's about going on your own journey and figuring out, well, why wasn't I taught any of this? And how does this relate to my family? And what can I learn more? There's incredible resources out there now. And, what I'm finding from a lot of my friends and their young children is that they're learning more from their young children about Indigenous people and culture than they ever learnt in their life. So there is great opportunity to learn about our First Nations people here in Australia that can help us feel more connected, not only to Indigenous people, but feel more connected to the lands that we live on.
And I'm sure there's a lot of football fans here today. In fact, I'm sure most of them are big football fans of yours. What's the most important thing that you've learnt on that journey through football?
Just to learn about myself. I went to Sydney when I was a 17-year-old. I knew I was Indigenous, but I didn't know how we were connected to our ancestry because my mum was taken away when she was 5, part of the white assimilation policy. And then, I learned about my culture, I learned about my identity, and I learned about how to be a leader through our leadership program. And that gave me confidence, and it gave me confidence that I belonged. And as soon as I started to feel like I belonged at the Swans, it's the first time I actually wanted to be a leader. And then with becoming a leader come responsibilities, and I really love having those responsibilities. And I really love the pressure to perform on a big stage, and those sort of attributes I learnt. These weren't things that were just gifted to me as ability. I had to learn those things, and for me, I've taken those attributes into my business life now. I don't have to perform on any big stages anymore under lights with 100,000 people, cheering and booing. But for me, what I've learnt most about my football career is that, what it takes to be a team member, what it takes to understand my own KPIs, the team KPIs, but also what it takes to be part of a culture that, defines the behaviours, defines the values and drives us to success, whether that be premierships, whether that be money that we're making for our investors, or whether it's the people that we're supporting throughout the organisation through the good work that we do.
And could you tell us a little bit about your journey when you went out on country and how that helped you connect?
Yeah, it was I did a TV show, not maybe some people saw it who are watching today, but Who Do You Think You Are? And that was a really good opportunity for me to reconnect to my ancestors back in the Flinders Ranges. But it also educated me on some of my ancestry that I didn't know about, being Marunga. So where my mum was born on the mission, Point Pierce, our ancestry actually goes back to that area as well. So not only learned how I was connected to Flinders Ranges, but I also learned how I was connected to where my mum was born and I was born as well. So it was incredible. And I tried to tell this story about, people ask, what does it feel like to sort of go back to the country and, plant your feet in the soil? And I get this feeling when I jump on a Qantas aeroplane anywhere in the world, when I know that it's coming back to Australia. When you just board and you give your ticket over to the hostess, and they've got an Australian accent, and automatically you feel like, wow, okay, I'm going home. And that feeling, that comfort and security of, wow, I'm going home, that's what it's like being on country. You're surrounded by your ancestors, you're in this really safe place, and it's a place that actually reboots and re-energizes your system. And I really find that a place, and I should have been there actually today or the last week, but we sort of cancelled our trip when Adelaide had that little breakout just recently. So we've postponed that trip till February, where we're going to take my little baby daughter Addie over there for the first time.
And you have recently become a dad, or 18 months ago now, I think. Yeah. How has that changed your perspective on your culture, and what dreams do you have for her?
Yeah, it's really, I'm really lucky that I've had the journey that I've had, because from day one that Adelaide was born, she knows, we'll be teaching her about her ancestry, where she comes from, how she's connected, sharing language. Part of her name, her middle name, is an indigenous word from where we come from. So for her, she's going to be very lucky and know exactly who she is as an Indigenous woman, and to be proud of that, and not really have that sort of doubts that I had as a teenager growing up about who I was and where I came from. But as a father, I'm absolutely loving my role. I think I'm so glad that I doing it this part of my life. I was very selfish throughout my football career. I needed to stay at the very top, and to have had little Addie during my footy career and not spend as much time as what I am spending with her, it just would be not fair on my wife, but not fair on her. But more importantly, not fair on myself, because I'm absolutely loving being a father. It's the best role that I have in the world right now, and it really does give you perspective on life. Being a parent, that everything that we do, has to fall into, how's this supporting, my daughter, my family? Because if it doesn't, then it really shouldn't be something that I should be undertaking.
Your mum sounds like an incredibly strong woman. How has she kind of fueled your vision and your role as an Indigenous leader?
Yeah, so my mum has had a very tough life. To think that, in 3.5 years' time that, she was taken away, that someone would take my daughter Adelaide away from me and put her into a white family and I would never see her again. They're the sorts of things that my mum has to live with every day. And I've got no doubt that when she was raising me and my 2 younger brothers by herself, that she was worried that if she didn't do a good job, that someone would come knocking on her door to take us away. And to live in that sort of fear and to make the decisions that she did for the family, I'm forever grateful for that. She was very hard on me. She instilled a lot of discipline, hard work into me, but also gave me the freedom as the man of the house in those younger years to choose my own path. And that really gave me enough leg rope to make good decisions, but also make a lot of bad decisions, but also to learn from those. And I look at my mum now, and she definitely is unfortunately a shadow of her former self. Life has definitely caught up with mum since us boys have moved away from home, and having to deal with the separation from families from such a young age, and never meeting her mum and her dad, so my grandma and grandfather, after that point when she was taken. So she's loving being a grandmother. She's loving that role. Unfortunately, we haven't seen each other for 8 months, having her been in Victoria, but we're looking forward to spending some more time with her over the Christmas break.
That's great. Thanks, Adam. And we've got some questions that have come through from the audience, so I'll just run through some of those. What are some indicators of an inclusive workplace for potential employees looking to join an organisation?
So the biggest thing for me is, if I was an Indigenous person about to apply for a job, looking to see if you have a reconciliation action plan. That's a really good benchmark to see where you're at and what level you are on that journey as well. Is it the reflect? Is it elevate? Is it innovate? Whatever level it is, that gives great security. I think also if there's other Indigenous people within the organisation in leadership roles, that to me is a really good sign of an organisation that is progressive and values that leadership and that voice that they bring to the table. And I think thirdly, even if you don't have Indigenous people working or don't have Indigenous people in leadership roles, you can still be very inclusive. You can still, hire a diverse group of people. And for me, when, an Indigenous person walks into an office and sees lots of colourful different faces and ethnicity in that group, they're going to know that this is a safe place. This is a place where diversity is accepted and celebrated.
Thank you. What compels you to talk to organisations, and is this something you regularly do, and why is it important?
So the biggest thing for me is that I can't wait for the government to get off its arse and do the work that they say they're going to do. We've had a Closing the Gap report now for 10 years, and all the key markers are going backwards. When we talk about Indigenous health, and we're talking about Indigenous incarceration rates, the only highlight is that we're now seeing more Indigenous children enrolled at early learning centres. We're seeing more Indigenous students graduating year 12 and going on to university. They're the only highlights out of all the KPIs in the Closing the Gap report. So we can't wait for them. So it's corporate Australia that put their hand up 10 years ago when they first signed up to reconciliation action plans. It's corporate Australia that are now signing up to Indigenous procurement policies within their organisation, Indigenous engagement policies. They're making a difference. Believe me, when Medibank start to make KPIs around Indigenous spend across the Indigenous business sector, and we start to get into the millions of dollars being spent through procurement, we're making a real difference. So that's why, I work with clients like Medibank and the other clients that I mentioned earlier, because they have an incredible reach. They have a lot of power. And they have an incredible voice, and a voice that me as an Indigenous person mightn't have without the backing of these companies.
And what would you want to say, if there's one thing to take away from today's session, what would you want to say to the organisations that have joined into this webinar?
I think, first of all, thank you. Thank you for tuning in, and you're connected to Medibank through whatever different reasons it is. And I think Medibank have made it very clear that they value and see this importance with working with Indigenous people, not only through the Reconciliation Action Plan, but through their procurement, through employment, and there's many different outcomes that they can work on. If you haven't started your journey, utilise Medibank as a bit of a benchmark to help you go on your journey and help, even helping through second and third tiering. If there's procurement that Medibank is subcontracting out to you as an organisation as a service, how do we get Indigenous people and businesses involved in that? So for me, there's lots of different ways that we can make it work and happen. But the first has to be the desire and want to be able to do that.
Thanks, Adam, and thank you so much for your time today. And I'd like to thank everyone for attending our 5th virtual session in our Work Better, Live Better series. We really hope we can continue this conversation with all of you and be a part of the solution in the future. At Medibank, we're here to support you and your employees, not just with private health insurance, but with health and wellbeing strategies on your journey to better health. Keep an eye on your inbox, as we'll be sharing a recap of today's event that you can share with your colleagues, and stay tuned as we'll be bringing you future events to help improve the health and wellbeing of your business and your employees. And I just want to take the opportunity to say, for everyone who is taking a break over this summer period, I wish you and your families a safe and well and joyous period over the summer period, and look forward to reconnecting in the new year.